Good morning. I wanted to make a video for you guys for your book file. I've had a lot of questions about it. I used to have a video posted, but it somehow deleted itself, and I can't find it. The first thing I want to show you is how to make a new text box. So let's say, for instance, you've completed this text box and you want to add a new one. Or let's do one that's completed. So let's say you finish this one. You're going to go to the very end of the words that are on that in that box, right click, and you are going to go to insert a row below. Then it gives you a new row, and you can type these things back in or copy and paste them. So that's how you do that. You go to the last word, right click, insert, row below, and that'll do that. Now let's talk about the connections. So I've pulled up a book on Amazon. It's not the picture I was looking for, of course, in the little snippet that they give us, but this one will do. This book is called Appalachia, The Voices of Sleeping Birds. It's by Cynthia Rowland, and it is about people who live in eastern Kentucky, Appalachian, that area. There's a picture in the story that has an old wood stove, and on the top of the wood stove there's a plate full of biscuits, and it talks about how the grandmother would spend her mornings baking, and then there were always leftover biscuits. And every time I read that story, I think about my own childhood and my grandmother and how she would leave the biscuits on the stove, and in the afternoons or late evenings, instead of biscuits, it was cornbread. And I can remember my grandfather at nighttime always had a glass of buttermilk and some cornbread that he would crumble up in it before he went to sleep. But there was always some type of baked bread on my grandmother's stove when I was a child. Here's another picture from that book that's a picture of a miner. He's dirty. There's an old man. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of people look just like this because I grew up in Breathitt County, moved to Perry County later in life, and so I've seen lots of coal miners. My brother-in-law was a coal miner as recently as a year ago, so these are very significant connections to me. So on this book file, the TS connection is text to self. What about this book can I connect to my life? So if I were reading this book, Appalachian, The Voice of Sleeping Birds, and this was my entry, I may write about the fact that seeing those biscuits on that wooden stove in the picture, or seeing the miner, I just have to pick one thing. The reason for these connections is because anybody can go write a summary of this book. You can get that off Amazon. You can Google the name of a book. It'll give you a summary. I've had way too many students try to plagiarize book files. That's not the purpose of you reading the 25 books. I used to make the class read 100 books, so I've really cut it down. You're welcome. But when you hit that classroom, you're going to be so thankful that you have these books that you've cataloged, and you'll have children, and you'll know them pretty well, and you'll be able to say, I think you should read this book, and so it'll be worth it to you. So the reason I incorporated these connections into my book file is because I want to know you read the book. There may be one sentence in that whole book that really hit you, and you're just going to tell me about that one sentence. And so that way I know you read the book and you had a connection to the book. The next one is T to T connection. T to T is text to text. What was it about this book that reminded you of a different book? Now, for example, the books don't have to have anything to do with each other. For example, the book Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Sorry, I'm backtracking. Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry is about an African American family living up in the South when segregation was very real, and the fact that they were discriminated against and they were treated as unequals. And that may remind you of a book you read about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, or that reminds you of reading something in Little House on the Prairie when an immigrant family moved in and then wasn't welcomed. It could remind you of many, many other books. Doesn't have to be the same subject matter. It could, for example, you could Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, the way that they weren't welcomed in certain parts. You could relate to even the Bible. There are stories in the Bible where certain people weren't allowed in certain places. They were very segregated. So any other book that reminds you of that book, you would make a connection there. Text to world connection is the TW. What about this book reminds you of something in the world? It could be something you've seen on TV. It could be a movie you've watched. It could be something going on right now. For example, the Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, and the whole fact that these people were segregated and made to feel unwelcome could remind you of what's going on right now with the fact that immigration is such an issue. Do we send these people away? Do we allow them to stay in our country? Those are very real issues, and issues much like what the African Americans dealt with back then. They were afraid for their future, just like immigrants now are afraid for theirs. So it could be any type of textual connection. Now, I do not want you to fill out all 3 connections on every single book. That's being a little crazy. I would expect you to have 1. I would like to see 2, but I definitely want to see 1. There are some books, like I remember a student a few years ago read a book about how crayons were made, and it was an informational text. Well, how in the world could he have many connections with that? But for myself, when I saw the book, I thought about my art teacher in elementary school and how he never let us throw a crayon away even if it was broken. We had huge boxes of crayons. So I hope that's made that a little more clear what the connections are and what I mean by them. And it's basically my way of knowing that you've read the book. The summaries do not have to be long and drawn out. They can just be a short paragraph, just enough that when I look at these and read these, I'm going to know you haven't copied this off of Amazon or Barnes & Noble. I'm going to know you read that book. That's the most important thing to me. So if you have any more questions, or if I haven't answered something completely, just let me know, and I'll be happy to try to clarify. Have a great day. Bye-bye.